let you know when we're live. And then I'll just kick us off into our agenda, which we'll start with Robert, but just want to wait until we get this thing moving. Okay, we are live. So thank you and welcome to the end of the quarterly meeting for the Basin Flood Action Committee. I'll run the show as the mayor is unable to attend this meeting, and we have Gray as our member here, West Ashley representative representing. I think we'll have a few more members pop on as we begin the agenda, but we are live streaming live for the public as well. So welcome for those watching, and we're going to go ahead and start the agenda. We're going to turn it over to Robert Hawk, the city's GIS director. He's been doing, we have these standing kind of flood stat updates that we've been doing for the public of the latest data between our last bi-monthly meetings. And then we were also, this meeting, we're also going to focus on kind of our road flooding vulnerability. So he's going to do a little deeper dive into some of the data the city has on that. So Robert, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you should be able to share your screen, but let me know if you need me to do anything on that end.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. I think I'm sharing. So I'm going to start with just some historical data and long-term trends that I think most people are familiar with these charts, but I think it's important to look at them occasionally, and maybe some new people aren't familiar, but that this is a chart that NOAA puts out. It starts in 1922 and goes up to 2024. And so the line there are flood stage levels exceeding 7.5 foot tide. So you can see, obviously there's a trend. Then going to this next slide or next tab. Oh, there we go. This is the most our flooding by month, and you can see September is our busiest month, but October is busy, and November and December. So we've had a couple busy months, and this chart just kind of shows that we're probably going to have a couple more busy months. So now let's look at the king tides from last month, or the last I guess flooding data for the last couple months. So July to September. This picture was taken October 10th when at the time the picture was taken, it was an 8.2 foot tide at this Washington Street at Society Street. It's one of our lowest intersections, so it's usually one of the first roads to flood, and it's just a nice picture that showed one of our police barricades. Start the slideshow. So September to October, we had 16 flood events. It's actually more than I thought. That sometimes you don't realize how often it floods unless you pull this data, because sometimes you just don't see the water. So we had 16 events. 14 of those were tide influenced, where the water was above flood stage, which is a 7 foot tide. And then 2 of those were over 8 feet, which is our major flood stage. And that was October 10th and 11th. And you can see that both of those days we had 35 mapped road closures. And then kind of to help to explain some of this, that 5 of those days were king tide days. And if you're not familiar with what a king tide is, it's a scientific term is a perigean spring tide, and that these occur when the Earth and the sun and the moon are aligned with each other, and the moon can either be behind us or between us and the sun, and that those are the days where we get these king tides. And the good news is all these dates are known, that it's a pretty constant thing, the moon going around the Earth. So we know these dates and we can plan for them. And if you're not familiar, the city has a web app called Tide-Eye that you can monitor the tides in real time, but it's got this calendar on there, so it's a handy tool to look at the year or the upcoming month to make sure you're not planning an event during one of these king tide days, especially if it's in a low area. So 10 of these events, on top of being over the flood stage, that we also had rain, so that's our compound flooding. But luckily, the days where we had a substantial rain, or over an inch, the rain didn't really correspond with the peak tide. So that these king tide days, they could have been much worse if just the rain and the high tide coincided at the same time. So that's one of our biggest fears when we get these king tides is if we get rain on top of it. So during well, I guess these 2 months, we had 149 mapped road closures with one flooded vehicle response. And I was a little surprised that we didn't have more flooded vehicles because the previous month we did. And I think that is because that these were all tidal influenced flooding, that these are kind of known spots, and especially the king tide days, we can plan for it and pre-stage barricades and things like that. And I think generally people are aware of these low areas, but it's the rain events that are a little more unpredictable and challenging and frankly dangerous. So luckily, only one flooded vehicle, but we'd like to get that to zero, of course. It's showing where these uh, flooded roads on the peninsula were. And yeah, I kind of wanted to take a minute to talk about our road closure mapping. That currently, typically, we're mostly just mapping roads on the peninsula, and that these are barricade locations that we're mapping roads as they are physically closed by the police department. That we do map some other roads that are just impacted, but typically it's just these barricade locations where we're closing a road. Ideally, yeah, we would map inundated roads throughout the city every event, but it just comes down to the amount of resources we can put towards mapping the closures and getting the information from the field. That all these closures, at least right now, are they're communicated from the field as people are seeing roads being impacted, or we've got some traffic cameras we monitor, and then there's a couple sensors that we can close roads, just based on how high we know the water is. So yeah, it's just a caveat about our road closure data that in reality there were many more impacted roads than 149 roads. That it's just these are the ones that get mapped into the system because they're kind of main thoroughfares and such.
Robert, and quickly,
Yes.
that end and a role of this committee, if the city and you and our first responders are start to get more flood reports off peninsula, then this is potentially where we could bring some resources and start mapping and including the data of off peninsula as well, right? That's something that maybe this committee can get out to their neighborhoods and their community to really start to report data to the city when they do see their roads routinely underwater as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That through Tide-Eye you can take pictures, and that we do use that data internally. That the picture's time stamped and it's geolocated, and it records the weather conditions when the picture was taken. So it is a useful tool. Getting roads mapped into this closure site is would be a little more challenging and maybe a larger project where we could do a crowdsource. Um, inundated road project. But that's something to consider. But right now, it's that the roads are communicated to the people doing the mapping through our emergency response people. Um, in the past, did this a little more robustly all around the city, but it just comes down to the resources that these large flood events is that it's a heavy lift for the city. So sometimes it's just it's the resources available to respond to some of these larger events. So this next slide is just to remind everybody, it's not a mystery where we have some of these flood problems. You don't need a supercomputer to model stuff. That the light blue color is the low areas. So these are elevations below, at or below 6 feet, and that you can see that the map closures line up with those pretty perfectly. That there's a few maybe like Hughes King isn't that low, that it's more of a drainage related issue that's going to be solved by at least mitigated some by a pump station we're putting there. But you can see that it's the low areas. It's where the water accumulates. It's where the tide can get to. That it's easily explainable of why we're having issues in some of these spots. What else did I have? Oh, stop sharing here. Let's have a few pictures from the king tides I can share. So some of these are tie-dye submitted pictures or just pictures that staff took during the event. So this is over close to Calhoun, just low elevation area that water can come out of storm drains in this area. Another one at Calhoun. But I've been watching Calhoun through these last several events. That there's a traffic camera there that I can look at now, and the water floods this. I guess that's I don't know, the right-handed lane if you're traveling east, that the water enters that lane first, and then eventually, if it gets deep enough, can cover the road. So I believe during these king tide days, we just had one lane closed on Calhoun, so I don't think they ever completely closed Calhoun. So there was a fire marshal's truck here stopping people from barreling into this right-handed lane. Another picture of Calhoun. Um, This is over on Lawrence Street. That the takeaway from these pictures is this is between 8 and 8.5 feet. Just looking to the future. That if you look at the projections that the city's kind of accepted as what the future looks like as far as future sea level rise, you can add a few inches, even up to a half foot on top of this to see that, we're not in bad shape right now, but it potentially could be worse in the future. And it probably will be. So this is where's this? Lockwood. Um, this is an area where the battery extension will help this, because right now once the tide gets above, I'm not sure when it overtops the road here, but it's anytime it gets close to 8 feet that the sea can enter the road. Uh, this is Morrison Drive. Luckily, we were concerned that there's a berm that protects a large portion of Morrison, kind of the lowest area of Morrison, and that it did not get overtopped. That the water was close, but it didn't get overtopped, which is good news, because then when it does overtop, it can flood a lot of parked cars, and the water gets real deep, and it's a real safety concern. So this is kind of farther north from where that berm is, where I'm not sure what the issue is here, where this water's coming from, if it's coming out of a storm drain or if it's coming directly from the creek. And then this is another low area that constantly have issues, usually rain, but this is the case where the tide's coming in. This is the Cool Below Nassau Street area. And then the market's low. That's usually South Market is one of the roads that gets mapped as closed. Yeah, some more North Nassau. Where is this? Yeah, in Hazel and Washington. So Washington Street has a lot of low areas along Washington Street. Another one on Washington Street. So yeah, that definitely not ideal situation at any of these spots, but that the where the tide held and the rain didn't really correspond with it, that it didn't wasn't as bad as it could have been. So that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
So, Robert, thank you for all of those visuals and the mapping there. I continue to be struck how our historical maps, like the Halsey map, overlay perfectly on some of these examples, and how most of the flooded streets you showed us were creek systems that water remembers where it wants to go. And I'm curious what we can do using the knowledge of where these creeks are to be even more proactive in understanding resilience or road closure measures that we can do as we're adapting those corridors where we can generally anticipate water to be, whether that's a high tide or rain event or both.
Yeah, those are good questions, and I think those are things that the water team would be best to talk about. That I think there's talk of daylighting some creeks that have been piped over the years. The lots of different options that could help, and Matt might have ideas too. But yeah, I think it's just that I like to show it just to illustrate that the cause of that there's a reason why we're flooding in these areas, and it's not because stuff was built poorly, or that kind of a thing, that or there's something's broken, that it's just which does happen, and that the city addresses it when as we can, but that a lot of this is just because it's low elevation, and um, it'd be difficult to get the water out without massive infrastructure projects, which is what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue to brief updates that I have on some of these projects. I do set this up for a reason, our agenda flow. But so I'm gonna briefly update the committee on some of these big projects we have going under resilience, and then and also some other projects that my counterpart Mika's working and kicking off on sustainability, that also is gonna assist with some of this management issues that we have across the city. And then we do have Jarrett from our water plan team. He's going to go and dive a little more into detail about the mapping and modeling that they did through the water plan specific to road impacts. And then Matt from our stormwater department is going to go dive a little more details into some future project details as well. So thank you for queuing that up, Gray and Robert. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully y'all are seeing that. Great. Okay. So just really briefly walking through some of our resilient projects that we have here. Obviously, what Robert was showing you is going to require large investments, right? And we're looking at everything from the spectrum of green to gray and in between when we're looking at these flooding solutions and challenges. And these are large investments. So we're fortunate that we do have this partnership with the federal government and their flood management arm of the Army Corps of Engineer. And we have a partnership specific to the peninsula, but also the rest of the city as well. And of course, that partnership on the peninsula is this vision of the battery extension project. That is, you've heard the mayor talk about it quite frequently, a priority project of flooding as a whole, but this is really the idea of getting that tidal and storm surge protection for the downtown area, and then integrating this polder type system that the Dutch dialogues and the water plan have recommended for the peninsula. So some really high level updates on that front. We've obviously this started with a feasibility study back in 2018. We've been negotiating an agreement to really refine and optimize what this what the design of the structure could be to really fit the historic aesthetic of Charleston. So we are really happy to say that we're at this point where a month ago we signed a design agreement. So we are now officially in this pre-construction engineering and design phase of this project. We are re-envisioning the timeline of this project and trying to concurrently work on this entire footprint that you see color-coded here on the left side of your screen. That's, you know, the west side of the peninsula, the east side, and the rehabilitation of our high battery. And we at the city have contracted through our water plan team. They are leading the design and engineering of this in partnership with the Corps for the city. So we'll continuously keep you updated on more high-level details of that, but just wanted to let the committee and folks know that we have this agreement signed and we are full acceleration moving forward on this project. And then, of course, also part of that partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers is this tidal and inland flood risk management study that we have looking more broadly citywide at not just storm surge, but, you know, as Robert just highlighted, these more frequent tidal events that we anticipate will continue maybe threefold over the next 25 years plus. So that's looking and, you know, really using the guide of the water plan team. Now the Army Corps is progressing the engineering of what some of these projects could be. So we've been in about a year and a half of the study phase with the Corps, and I'm going to look to have them come back in probably our January meeting to give a little more detailed work to the committee and readout of what they've been up to. But I will say one of the goals of this study is particularly looking in West Ashley and James Island, where we have some more of the appropriate space for large-scale nature-based solutions. And the city's going to lead on that effort too with the Corps. So we're excited about that. And I guess last committee, you got an update from our team that's leading the flood action plan for the Rosemont and Bridgeview resilience. So just giving you an update that we've had a couple rounds of community review. We're finalizing those projects and hoping that we get a short-term project in the works for the Rosemont community in the next year or two. And then, of course, there's these larger adaptation plans that will be part of the broader resilience plan that the flood action plan will be in. So I wanted to give you all an update that is on time and moving. And then this is also something, you know, I don't know if this committee has quite been, we've totally introduced you all to this concept, but this just corridor, this ecological corridor concept that, again, counterpart Mika has helped spearheaded with grassroots community involvement, really spearheaded by the Marsh Project, a community group that's invested in our ecosystems all across the city and in their neighborhood. And so we've had this concept of really kind of renaturalizing our built environment and how do you do that on a different varying scales and scopes of projects. And we're really excited to announce that we've got some funding to start doing some of this work in the Halsey Creek area in the Wagner Terrace neighborhood. Current projects being scoped and drafted to clean the historic creek channel up there between 10th and 12th Avenue and clearing out existing stormwater outfalls to help improve some stormwater drainage up there. And then actually some restorative work of the creek and going back in and then planting some Spartina marsh grass. And we're excited. We'll keep you updated on the progress with that, but that is hopefully set to begin the actual restoration work next spring. And then also a component of this corridor on the peninsula is the New Market Creek area. You're seeing here is a rendering from our water plan. This was one of the conceptual projects that the water plan talked through for the peninsula. And I think back in the spring updated you that the city, we had gone after two existing grant opportunities through NOAA and through the NIFWIF that we could get some significant money to really kickstart the preliminary design, permitting, and restoration work on this site. So we anticipate to hear back by the end of the year. Obviously, the federal government shutdown right now, it's contingent on that. So we're hopeful that will be resolved shortly so that we can get, you know, movement on some of these projects and some answers. And of course, again, this is a project guided by the water plan, but it also complements city efforts underway for the low-lying linear park project as well. And then also just, you know, again, we were talking about, just wanted to bring to the attention of this committee and folks that may not be aware in the public and residents that, you know, this legislative delegation at the state. They've rebooted this countywide intergovernmental flood prevention task force. They met for the first time in about a year last week, and they're going to have quarterly meetings, the next one February 13th. But it really is a collaborative way for all entities to sit at the table, talk through issues, and kind of almost divvy up and talk through who's doing what to actually solve the problem. And, I highlight this specific for this committee because, as we are thinking through our basins that were guided by the water plan, particularly when we're looking in areas of the city like James Island and West Ashley and Johns Island, we are looking at a maze of jurisdictions. So this is a really good tool for residents that are out there that they will literally, there's that survey link there. Again, we always want you to send your pictures for city residents to us as well. But, if you're in one of those multi-jurisdictional neighborhoods, send some photos, some issues you're having to this survey, and they will really nail down and tailor and look at all the entities that are involved, whether it's the county, the city, the town, Department of Transportation. So encourage folks to check out that site. And then finally, I just have to, we're keep moving with WaterWise, and we're doing monthly spotlights and here with the fall. And, obviously when we do have the kind of flooding events that Robert highlighted, we've seen that we will continue to see throughout November and potentially December is, what can you do at your own scale? So we're kind of spotlighting WaterWise this month, that we say fall yard care. So we like to say where you leave your leaves matters, right? So making sure that you're keeping any sort of the pipe systems unclogged and drainage, and, reiterate and elevate that the city does have that adopt a drain program. So check out that site, see if there's a drain that's available in your neighborhood to adopt, and you and your neighbors can help keep that flow going. So I will highlight that. And then I did want to, in a good transition from Leaf here, I wanted to give Mika a few minutes to talk about the relief initiative that she's spearheading at the direction of Mayor Cogswell to help accelerate the tree canopy in the city of Charleston. So I'm going to stop sharing, Mika, and let you share to talk a few minutes about the tree initiative.
Absolutely. I've got a newfound appreciation for your ability to segue. I have to work on that. And I'll be brief. Thank you so much for just providing some time for me to share this initiative. As Caitlin alluded to, this initiative was something that Mayor Cogswell has prioritized. And so it very succinctly, relief, and this is a title that was created by Robin Kidd, formerly of Stormwater, and working logo, not our permanent logo here, but relief is essentially the city of Charleston's new urban tree planting initiative designed to restore canopy coverage, reduce heat vulnerability, and also strengthen community partnerships. And I think that last part is going to be tremendous to our success. But for us, and Kaylin gave me the idea to leverage the work that we've already created here in the city. So almost immediately, we reached out to Casey Conrad and GIS, who was instrumental. And I'm actually including a couple of slides, or I think 3 slides specifically from Casey. Casey was able to present this morning at the RSAC meeting. So if you want to go back on YouTube and review that, it'd be great to see his full-on presentation. But essentially, we took our heat canopy story map as inspiration to assess where the need for increased tree canopy, how we could prioritize our first steps. And this is a slide from Casey's slide deck here. Upon receiving some feedback from Mayor Cogswell, I asked Casey to focus on the James Island Creek Basin area so we could see where some of the tree canopy needs are. Again, kind of using the approaches that we've seen in the story, the heat story map, canopy, sorry, flipping my words a little bit, but taking that story map, but also overlaying this with the ArborPro data that our forestry team was able to take advantage of. We're able to see vacant tree wells here. So with that data overlaid, in this screen right here, in this area, we're seeing about 3,600 trees. This is actually not just identifying where there are opportunities for us to plant, not just vacant wells, but the quality of the current tree canopy throughout all of Charleston, but again, focusing on James Island. And one of the challenges, and Casey reiterated this morning, is we have this humongous file of amazing data from the ArborPro survey, but it also requires us to comb through the data to find the truly viable opportunities that allow us to move and again cite where the low-hanging fruit is, I guess, essentially. So some of the criteria that Casey was able to establish working with our urban forestry team, and I want to say Adria and Clark have been sensational in terms of providing me with time and an abundance of resources for me to be able to interpret the data and also use some of the best practices that have already been established within the city. So Casey was also able to do the same thing to create this criteria here, such as locations with overhead power lines. And that's going to be a key part of seeing where our infrastructure is and how we can plan and provide a good variety of trees. Underground and above ground utility conflicts, locations subject to tidal flooding, size of the tree well. Not every tree well that has been designated vacant with the ArborPro study is a viable tree well. So combing through that data is going to be very important in cleaning that up. And also like diversity of species is something to consider as well. I made the error of what we have to make sure that that we make the best decisions given what we've learned over the city and over time with the city. And what I've learned also is that this is not the first foray into improving tree canopy. So I really want to apply a lot of the feedback from our urban forestry team, and that includes perhaps revisiting, some of the practices around what we plant, specifically along areas that the city currently owns. And yeah, this is just another snapshot of the ArborPro tree inventory. So over 75,000 city tree wells were identified, broken down according to species, condition, height, diameter, etc. And one thing that's really good to know is that a lot of our trees, most of our trees, are in great condition, are in good condition. So that was really good to hear. I think Casey said that it's closer to 90% of trees are in good condition here. And again, this is something in the early stages of this initiative, Casey came up with a plan that focused on the peninsula, which is the hottest area of Charleston. Mayor Coswell wants to make sure that whatever we plan, it addresses all of Charleston, but we also know that the peninsula has the most opportunities for planting trees or repairing our canopy or improving our canopy coverage, but also has the heat. The heat study and other initiatives have shown us this is where the need is as well. So I'm going to end the slide presentation here. So we're in our early stages of planning. This morning, our rollout at my committee meeting was intended to figure out where the interest is, and so we can create a subcommittee with our community partners. I was also tasked with coming up with a list of community partners. I broke them down according to whether or not they were commercial partners, nonprofits, and et cetera. And so we have a whole host of folks who would be great partners for this program. We're looking for people to, yes, sponsor the cost of some of the tree planting, but more importantly, or just as importantly, also folks who will get out there and help us plant trees. And I'm looking forward to building this out. This is very early stages. But again, GIS team, urban forestry, Jason, folks have been phenomenal in their support. And I want to make sure that we lead off with the best data and the best information before we get too far ahead. But yeah, that's relief in a nutshell.
Thanks, Mika. And I think kind of a directive that we'll give to this committee is, as we're formalizing and finalizing this program, like, do know that it will be a true, city community partnership. So within your purviews of your neighborhood and community, think about maybe some businesses, nonprofits, neighborhood associations that you can start to socialize this with that may want to come to the table when we have this finalized. We'll save a little bit of questions if you have one. I think Mika's going to stay on the line so we can keep moving in our agenda. But I do want to next, I do have a slide for you, Jared, but I do want to move towards, we've kind of tried to set up this program of, we start with the data, talking about what's occurring right now in our city with flooding, but specific to the roads today, and talk a little bit about some of the projects we're working on at a large and different varying scale. So wanted to turn the mic over to Jared, and then I think you might tag team with Matt. They're going to go over some of the mapping and modeling from the water plan in some of these areas across the city, and then diving into what some of these specific projects could be. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Jared, and if you want to go ahead and share yours. I just hit allow, so you should be able to.
Let's see here. Can y'all see my screen? Here we go. We good? Okay, thanks, Galen. Can y'all hear me?
We got you
Great.
loud there. Thanks.
Okay. I just want to provide a quick overview of kind of our approach to modeling that we did for the water plan, kind of the underlying thought behind it. Matt Fountain, the director of stormwater, feel free to jump in whenever you feel like. But just kind of talk about how we identified some key corridors and some areas that could really use some elevation or protection through a whole host of strategies. Just to start with, this is showing the overall city. We focused on city limits. We're looking at 3 different categories or 3 thresholds of flood risk here. And this ties real closely into what Robert was talking about. So we've got the 8-foot mean lower low water tide. That's a major tidal flood today. We've seen roughly 3 to 8 of those occur each year over the past 5 or 10 years. So relatively common occurrence. And the blue colors that you see on the map, and it'll be easier to see as I dive into some more detailed areas, those are actually modeling that coastal boundary condition and what would be inundated from those events. The water plan's planning horizon was 2050, and the city's sea level rise levels that had been adopted are predicting 14 inches from current datums to 2050. So the more green turquoise color you see on the map, and again, this will be much easier as I get closer in. That's that same major tidal flood, but it's adding 14 inches of sea level rise on it. And then finally, we took basically a 1% annual exceedance probability storm event, or the 100-year storm rainfall, and set that to occur at that 14 inches of sea level rise. So really looking at 3 different scenarios here to indicate areas at flood risk. A couple things to keep in mind as we go through this data. This is a rain on grid model, so it's a physics-based model looking at the land use, the land cover, the soils. What this is not is a detailed stormwater system model. We don't have the pipes and the inlets and the infrastructure across most of this that the city has. So I like to say this isn't a tool for predicting where it's going to flood, or how deep it's going to flood, or how long it's going to flood, or if you're going to flood. This is really trying to indicate areas at risk of flooding. And as we get into it, what we saw, I would say the rain we had in late August, like August 22nd, 23rd, along with those high tide events, that's similar to kind of what we're modeling here. I'm just going to go through the major planning areas that we divided the city up. This is looking at James Island. Again, you can see the blue on the edge of the Stono River showing the major tidal flood conditions today. You can see that greenish turquoise color come further into the land, which is that 14 inches of sea level rise. And then the red is showing the rainfall impacts that occur with that. I'm going to flip through these real quick and we'll get into some specific areas. This is kind of looking at outer West Ashley. So again, one thing this really helps you see is the areas that have the tidal influence, and then the areas that are more of a compound flood risk situation where you have the rainfall and the tide coinciding. And then as you get higher, you get more in the riverine or just the flood risk areas. This is James Island, so you can see it's much lower. There's a lot more blue on this map than there was in Outer West Ashley. But you still have the stormwater and rainfall impacts as well. This is Inner West Ashley in the peninsula. The peninsula is actually very hard to see at this scale because there is so much tidal flooding in the low-lying areas, those old creek beds in a lot of ways that Gray had alluded to. And then going out to Daniel Island, you can see a lot of the development on Daniel Island was built post modern stormwater regulations, and it doesn't really flood, but you can see the impacts of sea level rise will start to impact that over time. And then finally, looking out to the Cainhoy Peninsula area, this is some of the highest land we have in the city, so you can see a pretty stark divide between where the tidal influence is and where the stormwater runoff risks are. Any questions, or Matt, Caitlin, anything you want to add before I move on?
Keep on going.
All right. So I'm just going to zoom into a couple different areas. This is Harborview Road on James Island. In particular, as you look in the upper left corner, you can see where the James Island connector comes in and connects to Harborview. You've also got, you can barely not see it on the screen, but Plum Island out here. This is an area that experiences tidal flood risk today and will experience further tidal flood risk as we see higher sea level rise and these higher tide events. These tidal boundary conditions also start impacting the ability for stormwater to drain off. You can see areas of flooding kind of in the country club along those areas. And you can also see the different creeks and fingers of the creeks that come into James Island. Stiles Point Elementary School is probably a good point of reference that Matt had pointed out when we were talking. But you can kind of see how Harborview and potentially that culvert that's under Harborview impacts the tides coming in, and are there ways that we can improve Harborview in these key locations to help alleviate upstream flooding conditions as well. Going to West Ashley, I think one of the most vulnerable tidal flooding areas in West Ashley is out here at the Savannah Highway 6117 split that regularly goes underwater, and you can see, I mean, it's pretty much all blue on this map and just highlights the critical need to do something at that location. One of the key features and things we noticed as we were going through this process in the water plan is between the West Ashley Greenway and Savannah Highway, there's a lot of opportunity to potentially raise small strategic portions at these creek crossings to get levels of protection from storm surge like the Army Corps Flood Risk Project on the peninsula or the Battery Extension would provide, with much less intensive construction methods and things that aren't. So I think you can see Savannah Highway in particular has a few hot spots here that certainly highlights the need for something to be done to keep these areas safe and passable. It's really critical as we think about health, safety, moving goods and services around the community. Moving a little bit further out in West Ashley, you can see again this creek system that comes up and it ultimately goes by Citadel Mall and continues way up. Matt's group has worked on the DuPont Wapu Stormwater Project and have identified a lot of projects to help alleviate these flooding issues up here. But a lot of it comes down to these culverts under Savannah Highway and the limited constriction they have. I will note one thing as we talk about trying to improve these crossings, we also have to limit or dampen the tidal impacts coming up. If we put bigger culverts in, that could let more tide water get back into the system, so you'd start getting adverse impacts that way. So it's important to think about check systems and kind of limiting that capacity and balancing the need to manage upstream stormwater runoff volume control along with tidal control when you think about sea level rise and tidal flooding. And then finally, just one more look out in West Ashley. This is the Long Branch Creek project. Again, you can see the Savannah Highway crossing here, and I think this one illustrates it pretty easily. Is you've got the tides coming in, and you can see that turquoise color and where that 14 inches of sea level rise would start to encroach on the neighborhood a lot more. But that's not just a tidal flooding impact, that's also impacting the ability for this stormwater to run off and drain into the creeks when the tide's high. So again, it's that balancing act, and how can we think about using these creek corridors to improve these conditions. And then finally, I'll end here on the peninsula. I mentioned it was hard to see at the other scale. It may still not be easy to see here, but you can really see as we look, I mean, anybody that's driven on the peninsula during some of these events that Robert was showing photos of, it's a lot goes under, particularly on the Lockwood corridor side. It's the first that goes under. And so what can we do? How can Lockwood, how can the battery extension work together with the knee wall that's currently under design? And then how can we leverage some of the work that and studies that have already been done with Alberta Long Lake and Calhoun West and the Calhoun Street corridor? There's a lot of flood risk here, and I think everybody on this call knows it, but you've got the region's only level 1 trauma center at MUSC right here in the smack in the middle of it. So that's a pretty scary thought when you think about these events occurring more often. Kaylin, Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Matt, if you wanted to take a few minutes of an opportunity to dive a little bit more into some of these project details that you and your team have thought about for these areas that Jared just highlighted, I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Yeah, definitely, Galen. So I think Jared did a good job going through the locations and some of the vulnerability that water plan team has modeled and looked at. The city's been looking at how do you try to address those vulnerable situations and locations from both that rainfall and tidal-based flooding. I think one of the challenges is when you look at road corridors, a lot of the times drainage has been thought of very similar to other linear utility features that are not necessarily connected to the roadway itself. So you might think of like electrical power, right? You might have above ground power lines, you might have underground power lines. You've got to make sure your power lines fit in the roadway corridor, don't impact the ability of people to drive on the corridor, but there's very little connection between how, power transmission and operation of a road interact. I think if you go back historically, there's been a lot of thought, again, similar with drainage, where you've got to make sure you leave a pipe for an existing creek or a drainage system to go through your street so you can drive over it. But there isn't a thought of, well, what impacts might the design of that structure have on the functionality of the road itself in the future? So what Jared's basically showing is that as we've had sea level rise, as we've had these intensifying storms, as we've had development occur in the area, many of the existing roadways are now severely hampered for the function of traffic flow of road activity because of the flooding and the drainage on that roadway. So, Jared, if you can jump back to like the Highway 6117 split, I think that's what I'll start with. Like that's a nice, easy example that Jared was mentioning. I think most people are probably familiar with this, but if you're coming from downtown into West Ashley, you go over the low flat bridges onto Highway 17 or 61 rather than the James Island Expressway. As you start to turn right and go on to Highway 61, if you're in a king tide, certainly, but even some of the high tides, you can actually have the ocean come up and into the roadway in that area and close lanes or close the road completely, depending on the level of tide. So that's an area where we're looking at, it would make a lot of sense to elevate the road in that location because while that is an impact from flooding, the negative impact of the flooding is on traffic, right? I mean, it's a traffic consideration. It isn't any benefit necessarily to adjoining properties and things. It's a benefit to the road that we're looking for to keep traffic flow. So that's a project that the city's looking at, relatively straightforward in collaboration with the county of saying this has got to get improved for functionality on and off the peninsula into West Ashley. If you shift over following down Savannah Highway in this location, you can see the first one here. As you get into the Avondale area, there's a crossing under Highway 17 that drains out the roads to the north of 17, and you can see a lot of red in there on the roadways where the roadways flood, including Savannah Highway itself, because the drainage corridor is not sufficient to move the rainfall off of those roads and out into the marsh to the south. So a scenario where we're looking at, could you upsize the culvert that is directly under Highway 17 that basically backs up and again causes road flooding and congestion through that corridor? This is an area where there's an ongoing project in Avondale that we're trying to coordinate those drainage improvements into potential intersection improvements in the future. As you keep shifting out, you get to kind of East Oak, West Oak Forest. Oh, sorry, Jared, one more in, there you go. You can see on the left side of the screen, kind of oak forest, Shelley. While there is a drainage ditch with a little bit of marsh there, what you're seeing is a river appearing feature, which likely was an old tidal feature, is actually mostly homes and roads through that corridor. You can see Highway 17 itself is significantly in the red, is heavily flooded. If you've been out in that area during a king tide, the tide itself is almost up into the roadway. And if you get any significant rainfall, you get flooding both in those exterior lanes of 17 and certainly in the roads, Shelley, Keats, some Oak Forest, Playground Road along that corridor. So that's a project. Again, we've done some initial modeling. The culvert under Highway 17 is a severe constriction. If we can upsize that as well as some of the culverts under the Greenway, provide some significant relief to that area. As Jared mentioned, important to include tide protection in that so you're not bringing more tidal water in and recreating that creek. You want to let stormwater flow out, maintain some tidal interflow for the health of the ecology, but then basically prevent that additional tidal flow from coming in and worsening tidal flooding. Shifting out a little bit more along the 17 corridor. 17 is a very classic example of where you've seen a long-standing road that has really suffered from a drainage capacity and caused a lot of road flooding. You get to as Jared touched on, the DuPont Wapu project corridor around Citadel Mall. There's enough red along Sam Rittenberg, Orleans Road, a number of the other side streets, DuPont, Wapu. You can see how much of that road is flooding. Most of that flooding constriction, again, due to the culverts under Savannah Highway, as well as some interior conveyance issues. But another project that we're looking at of could you improve that culvert under Savannah Highway and allow more water out to drain out that area. Moving one more over, Jared mentioned Long Branch Creek, same approach. You can see the flooding on Savannah Highway itself just to the east of Long Branch Creek, and then certainly the flooding that comes through the neighborhood there through what is likely an old marsh connection between different marsh fingers, flooding those streets, causing a lot of issues. So that's kind of the Savannah Highway corridor improvements we've been looking at as part of any road improvements in West Ashley, saying let's not go improve traffic and flow of a road, but have it still flood every time there's a major rain event. That's not a recommendation of a way to build a good leverage project that addresses multiple issues, right? Moving to James Island, I think Jared talked about Harbor View and covered a lot of that very well in his presentation. This one, again, relatively straightforward, and that much of the causeway is very low, is subject to risk of tidal flooding. Right now, it is kind of just high enough to not experience extreme flood or frequency of flood, unless you get a really, really extreme tide. But if you get just a little bit of additional sea level rise, it triggers over into those king tides, basically flooding the roads. So trying to say now is the time to address that before the road is regularly overtopping and flooding. Again, a very important access corridor during extreme events to a very large population for hospital access and other things. Good time to get in there. As Jared mentioned, over on near Michael Drive, near South Point Elementary School, there's an existing drainage slough that seems to be constricted by Harbor View, causing quite a bit of backing up and flooding in the vicinity of the school in that area. Again, mostly flooding the road. A lot of the properties, if you drive through that area, are pretty high and dry, which really channels that water down into the roadway and causes the road to flood. So that's another area we'd like to look at. If you flip to the other, and Jared, don't change the picture. When I say flip to the other side of Harbor View, I mean across the James Island Expressway. There's a similar flooding issue in Country Club 2, where the water floods the low-lying roads in that neighborhood because they can't get out through the Harbor View outfall into the marsh in that location. So looking at upsizing that as well to try to help the road flooding in the Country Club community. And then lastly, Kaylin, I think I touched on the Calhoun Street corridor, and Jared as well with the medical district. I can keep my lights from turning off. So the Calhoun Street corridor, where you're coming over the James Island Expressway, so access the peninsula from James Island on one of the roads that is obviously the most protected from flooding, the expressway itself, which has quite a bit of elevation to it if you've driven over it. But coming down into Calhoun Street, which is one of the most flooded roads on the peninsula to access the medical district. So trying to figure out a route here to upsize the drainage, because what's happening, as Jared's showing very well on the map, is these old creek beds that have been filled in are trying to drain down Calhoun Street. And if you are used to driving this area, it literally creates a river down Calhoun Street, as well as Ashley and Rutledge, which are other major access points into the medical district properties. And then Jonathan Lucas, of course, which is their access into most of the emergency rooms within the medical district. That is a clear corridor for improvement to bring that water out more effectively into the marsh in a way that is not flowing through the street, but instead through culverts underground, or potentially in a different route, potentially a tunnel or some other conveyance mechanism, possibly to Alberta Long Lake and under Lockwood. So those are projects that the city's looking at for kind of coordination with transportation efforts, because they are directly related to road congestion and access, in addition to many of the other projects that we've talked about previously, where we've often looked at property flooding as well as road flooding. These are kind of our transportation initiative style projects for the area.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jared. I think this was really helpful context to bring back up the water plan, how we're using it, how we're, truly trying to leverage projects to have this multiple benefits and be truly resilient. We are almost at time, but I do at least want to give a minute or two for those that can hang on the line, if you did have any questions to ask before we have to close. So I'll give a moment if there are any of the committee members that would like to ask a question. Gray, I see you unmuted.
Galen, are there any public questions or comments? I want to make sure there's time for that if there are any first.
I did not have any public comments submitted. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Great, thank you. Matt, do you know if there's any opportunity for us to use the 526 right-of-way where we won't have the new extension of the parkway for any of that, any drainage solutions in that part of West Ashley?
So it's a good question, Gray. There are some projects we've been looking at as part of the DuPont Wapu project of, are there other options for utility corridors in that area to get water out? We haven't found a successful route through that yet, but it's something we've just started looking at as that project has sort of shifted off of the aggressive path forward and into a much more on hold or delayed or canceled, depending on exactly which approach you hear.
Right. Well, no, I appreciate that, and I recognize we're at time, and got a million questions that I might have to save till next one. But I appreciate all the work that all of you are doing and continuing to provide these resources, and would love to use or provide some of this mapping and some of this information to better communicate a lot of this to our constituents and to the public as well, because I think when we hear about West Ashley becoming a new sea island, that map that Jared provided is pretty sobering to look at with those drainage patterns through there. But thank you all for your work, and would love to be as helpful as I can. Charles, I want to leave space for you as well if you had something about James Island.
Charles, please, before we wrap up.
I just had one question. It's been on my mind for a while. It kind of continues to come up in my professional realm, and I really enjoyed everything that Mika had to say. If we talk about trees and we talk about stormwater regulations and sustainability and all these things and how they overlap with nature, I don't know of a specific metric and information that either the city has and can share, or a private entity that acts as a consultant to guide. And the premise of that is, how many gallons an hour at the maximum can a live oak handle? 20 inches. All right, that tree is now 60 inches. How many gallons of an hour of water can it process without any detrimental effect to the tree? And then what happens if there's 4 of them near each other, like on my property? Or what happens when there is a forest of them All right. And then especially with pine trees, since, the ongoing discussion about these large residential tracts of land around town where we clear the whole forest and then re-engineer the entire site, we actually don't know, as far as I'm aware, what the ecological impact of that was. We don't know what an entire forest can absorb and how that looks versus a young tree, a mature tree, or a grandfather tree. And I think that that is one of the most important metrics that we understand. And I don't know how to go about that. I talked to my arborist friend about it a lot. It actually came up in a different situation today, but I just wanted to mention that. I think it's super important, and I don't know how we get to that where we know how to fully utilize trees to our advantage and integrate them. Like, if I have a bunch of big trees on my property and I have stormwater requirements for developing it, how do my trees play into that? How can we utilize nature within that versus simply and only designing around man-made features?
And I want to echo that. I think that's a really good point. And when we're looking at places upstream, like the Great Bear Swamp in West Ashley, for example, and areas that may not be in Charleston County but are further upstream from us as well, and managing water coming through the system, our freshwater wetlands and the landscape that is able to absorb or slowly kind of move water through it in a way that is able to reduce harm and reduce the rush that would come through when we're channelizing everything, I think is very important. So I look forward to seeing what hybrid solutions for storage and for moving the water through a landscape the way a freshwater wetland would could be incorporated. And I'm excited about the inter municipality or the interjurisdictional collaboration that's happening, and I hope that can expand to our neighboring counties as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and Caitlin, I'm just saying I'll follow up with both Charles and Greg regarding those questions/statements.
Yeah, I was gonna also suggest, since we're time up today, that perhaps it sounds like there's interest in spending more time on nature-based solutions, and maybe getting a little more detail from Matt next time of how the city, through our stormwater design manual, things of that nature, bringing in some of our development services folks maybe to help also just frame this conversation of how we do nature-based solutions as well, but also getting a little more, maybe even having some of our forestry folks talking of like that criteria we use in the city. I think that may be, beneficial to have as a larger topic that we dive into in a little more detail for our next agenda. If that sounds right for folks, we can help get the right folks at the table to answer some of these questions. With that, I think, if we're good to know, I appreciate you all spending, 2 members last standing here at the committee meeting and taking the time today to absorb all this information, no pun intended. But I will also, just for housekeeping, we need to get our schedule for our meetings next year. So stay on the lookout. I'm going to try to keep them around the 3 to 4 o'clock timeframe on Thursdays at a bi-monthly. I'll coordinate with some of the city leadership's calendars and your calendars, and I'll get them on as soon as possible. But in the meantime, if you have any questions for me or anybody that was presenting on this call, obviously reach out and we'll get you those answers prior to our next meeting. But thank you again, and we will